Ladies and gentlemen, your attention please. We're looking live right now here at Jimmy at the Crossroads, episode 55, as we're ready to go. And so is Jimmy Sengenberger. He'll be live in moments. Stay tuned.
And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program, and it is such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you, as always, on this Tuesday, June 2nd edition of the program that brings engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style. Thanks for joining us. If you want to be a part of the festivities, please feel free to tweet at me. You see it right there on the screen. That's at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. You can also email me, contact me via the websites jimmyatthecrossroads.com and jimmysengenberger.com. Remember, there's no A, there's no I, there's no U in Sengenberger. It's all E's all the time. Once you know that, Sengenberger is easy. Also, please, if you have not done so already, subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads, and on Facebook, where you can also watch our content and read and more with the content. Interact and engage, too, in fact. Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality, that's facebook.com/Jimmy Sengenberger Pro. And, of course, you can also go ahead and follow our friends at the Washington Examiner. Please do. WashingtonExaminer.com and on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So today we're going to delve into a couple of different topics. Once again, here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, we're going to talk about the President of the United States. It looks like he is going to be using the Insurrection Act in order to mobilize the military in certain areas of the country where these riots are just not under control. We're seeing the disintegration of security around the country. Some areas are finally dying down in terms of the conflict. Things are getting a little bit calmer. In other parts of the country, things are not. Here are some scenes from protests yesterday in various parts around the country. And you can see there's fires going on. In fact, there's reports also, Daily Wire reporting, that there was a burning building that rioters had put ablaze in Richmond. That was a multi-family home that included a child inside the residence. A child in the residence, and the firefighters, it took a while for them to be able to get through the crowds and into the burning multi-family building. So much chaos around the country, it must most certainly be resolved. Yesterday, President Trump went before the nation and gave an address in which he, in less than 7 minutes, explained his view on things, including, for starters, in Cut 2, The President of the United States expressing his sorrow over the killing of George Floyd, but also making it clear that domestic terror is unacceptable.
All Americans were rightly sickened and revolted by the brutal death of George Floyd. My administration is fully committed that for George and his family, justice will be served. He will not have died in vain. But we cannot allow the righteous cries and peaceful protesters to be drowned out by an angry mob. The biggest victims of the rioting are peace-loving citizens in our poorest communities. And as their president, I will fight to keep them safe. I will fight to protect you. I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters. But in recent days, our nation has been gripped by professional anarchists, violent mobs, arsonists, looters, criminals, rioters, Antifa, and others. A number of state and local governments have failed to take necessary action to safeguard their residents. Innocent people have been savagely beaten, like the young man in Dallas, Texas, who was left dying on the street, or the woman in upstate New York viciously attacked by dangerous thugs. Small business owners have seen their dreams utterly destroyed. New York's finest have been hit in the face with bricks. Brave nurses who have battled the virus are afraid to leave their homes. A police precinct has been overrun here in the nation's capital. The Lincoln Memorial and the World War II Memorial have been vandalized. One of our most historic churches was set ablaze. A federal officer in California, an African-American enforcement hero, was shot and killed. These are not acts of peaceful protest. These are acts of domestic terror.
In his speech last night, the President of the United States, in Cut 3, talked about some of the actions he will be taking as president, especially if governors fail to get their states under control with this crisis.
The following measures are going into effect immediately. First, we are ending the riots and lawlessness that has spread throughout our country. We will end it now. Today, I have strongly recommended to every governor to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers that we dominate the streets. Mayors and governors must establish an overwhelming law enforcement presence until the violence has been quelled. If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them. I am also taking swift and decisive action to protect our great capital, Washington, D.C. What happened in this city last night was a total disgrace. As we speak, I am dispatching thousands and thousands of heavily armed soldiers, military personnel, and law enforcement officers to stop the rioting, looting, vandalism, assaults, and the wanton destruction of property. We are putting everybody on warning. Our 7 o'clock curfew will be strictly enforced. Those who threaten innocent life and property will be arrested, detained, and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I want the organizers of this terror to be on notice that you will face severe criminal penalties and lengthy sentences in jail. This includes Antifa and others who are leading instigators of this violence.
Although it looks like Washington, D.C. may be releasing a lot of these folks that have been apprehended because they were wearing masks, and it's tough to confirm identification because of the masks that the government is telling people they should wear. In other words, the government has been saying, go ahead and wear face masks. We want you to. We're telling you to. In some cases, we're requiring you to, many cases. So they do it, and, it just so happens that their identities get to be concealed. Look, we're seeing some stunning information come across from these riots in terms of who's participating, who's handling them, who is orchestrating them, or at the very least, giving plenty of indications that orchestration is happening. What we've been seeing are that a heck of a lot of these so-called protesters, the rioters, are from out of state. I was looking here for an article, I can't find it in front of me, that talks about how I think only 1 in 5 in one of the cities, might be New York City, I think it's New York City, of the rioters, only 1 in 5 of them are from the actual state of New York, if I'm correct that New York City is the city. So when you're looking at numbers like that, you cannot help but think, is this being coordinated? Is this some sort of an intentional effort on the part of, and we've been saying it here, for example, with Basil Baz, former CIA officer, and others, that this seems to be a follow the money situation. And it's stunning to think about how widespread this violence and this mayhem are. And so President Trump, I think understandably, is trying to take some action here. Now, I do agree with the Wall Street Journal, for example, which says that it would be best if we don't have the U.S. military going in at the president's orders, directive. And that would be best. However, at the same time, the situation needs to be made under control, and if it is not, then it is within the president's prerogative to take that sort of action. Now, in Cut 4, I want to show President Trump yesterday. We'll start playing it now. He was done with his speech, his address to the nation, and decided to take a walk. This was pre-planned, this was intentional, this was strategic. President Trump took a walk. People were wondering, where are we going? Where are we going? And it was to, and we'll see it in a moment here, St. John's Church, which had been attacked and set ablaze by rioters over the weekend. An historic church that every president has prayed in since James Madison, the 4th president of the United States. There's the president. We'll hear some of his words, I think, here as well when he spoke outside St. John's Church. No, I guess we didn't have the words. You could go back and show a little bit more footage, please, Nathan Matoush. So the president then also said a few words there outside of the church, and it was, yes, it was an actual photo op in the sense that the president was outside the church and photographs were taken, and he had his brief message. But here's the significance of this moment. It sent a message. I'm walking through the ravages of the riot, the aftermath of the riot. And I'm not going to be stopped, and I'm going to stand outside the church that was devastated by rioters, and I'm going to make a statement. He wanted to show some strength in the face of chaos by walking through an area that had been literally ravaged by rioters, and a church of great historic significance set on fire and say, I'm still here, the church is still standing, we're walking through it. Now, there's been a lot of controversy over how they had to clear out protesters in order for the president to make that statement. Look, if they needed to make the statement, felt the need to get that point across and to show that kind of strength and leadership that, by the way, has not been shown by the president very well in this crisis. I have to say that President Trump and his tweeting and the different things that he has said have just not shown the kind of leadership that we need. But yesterday, I think he did, with his statement in the Rose Garden, followed by that walk. However, protesters did have to get removed in order for that to happen, because the president needed to make a statement, and Secret Service has one job, which is to protect the life of the president and his family. The president of the United States, his safety is paramount for the Secret Service. And we have to recognize that what happened was necessary in order for that message to be sent. Now, that doesn't mean that it's comfortable. That doesn't mean that, see, here's the thing. He had to have, the Secret Service and the police had to have let the public know about what was happening, and that they needed to clear out in advance. I don't see how there's any way that did not happen. And then they refused to heed the warning of the authorities, didn't clear the way, which was necessary for the safety of the President of the United States. So I think there was some appropriateness there to what had happened. Now, overall, when the President of the United States gets out there and says, I'm going to use, if necessary, the Insurrection Act. I'm going to use the Insurrection Act, if necessary, in order to get the U.S. military in those locations to address this. I'm going to do it. Let's go ahead for a moment here, though. In terms of calls for calm, cut 5. This is George Floyd's brother, the late George Floyd, who of course had been murdered. George Floyd's brother, and let's take a listen to him and what he had to say at a protest.
I understand y'all upset, but like it was already said, I doubt y'all half as upset as I am.
Come on now.
So if I'm not over here wilding out, if I'm not over here blowing up stuff,
Come on.
if I'm not over here messing up my community,
Come on.
then what are y'all doing? What are y'all doing? Y'all doing nothing, because that's not going to bring my brother back at all. It may feel good for the moment, just like when you drink, but when it come down, you're gonna wonder what you did.
That's right. So true.
My family is a peaceful family. My family is God-fearing. Yeah, we upset, but we're not gonna take it. We're not gonna be repetitious. In every case of police brutality, the same thing has been happening. Y'all protest, y'all destroy stuff, and they don't move. You know why they don't move? Because it's not their stuff, it's our stuff. So they want us to destroy our stuff. Come on, Doc. They're not gonna move. So let's do this another way.
That's right. Come on now, brother.
Let's do this another way. Y'all right. Let's do this another way. Let's stop thinking that our voice don't matter.
That's right.
and vote. Not just vote for the president, vote for the preliminaries, vote for everybody. Educate yourself. Educate yourself. Don't wait for somebody else to tell you who's who. Educate yourself and know who you're voting for. And that's how we gonna hit them. Because it's a lot of us. It's a lot of us.
That's right.
It's a lot of us.
A lot of us.
I just thought that was tremendously powerful. What leadership that the brother of the late George Floyd, who was murdered by police officers, what courage, what leadership he showed. Calling for nonviolence, calling for calm, calling for people who supposedly are lashing out because of what happened to his brother and saying, this is unacceptable. Vote. Go to the ballot box. Make your voices heard. That's exactly right. That's exactly the way they should go about it. Now, while President Trump takes some very strong-arm tactics in order to bring some order to this chaos, we have calls for peace and calm and important, proper messages, and that's what we're seeing here with George Floyd's brother, much like Mayor Bottoms of Atlanta, who we played video of yesterday. She has shown tremendous leadership. Now, President Trump is a controversial figure for sure, and as I said, I think that he hasn't shown the level of leadership we've needed in the past several days. But yesterday, overall, I thought was what we needed to hear, what we needed to see as a country. And hopefully cooler heads will prevail. And then the next day or two, the situation will be resolved and peacefully. Too many people have died, too many people have lost their livelihoods, too many businesses destroyed, devastated, and more. We must get back to living our lives, especially as reopening is finally happening. And we must see people being able to be safe and feel safe, even in their own homes, in their communities. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Coming up, we're going to be talking with Julio Gonzalez, who is a tax reform expert and the founder and CEO of Engineered Tax Services. Looking forward to talking with him about some of the things we could do with regards to taxation to help revitalize the economy. We've got that and so much more coming up today in partnership with the Washington Examiner. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Now, we need a little bit of levity. Cue it.
Do you suffer from feelings of entitlement, self-righteousness, and arrogance? Fits of resentment, anger, and hypocrisy? Terror that the world is going to end, or even worse, that the world isn't going to end and that things are going to get better? A deep need to point fingers, deflect, or deny? Uncontrollable stress, frustration, or depression? Fear of recession, fear of no recession? Then you may have PTDS, or President Trump Derangement Syndrome. Fortunately, there's new Magatol, the proven cure for PTDS. Just one Magatol a day realigns your sensibilities by bypassing erratic brain signals to amplify the logic receptors. Talk to your Obamacare doctor today to see if Magatol is right for you. Recommended dose of reality is at least once daily. Warning snowflakes. Side effects of Magatol may include optimism, hope for the future, good feelings about your country, accepting economic prosperity, renewed faith in capitalism, and admitting that things aren't so bad under Trump. If you discover you're allergic to common sense, stop use immediately and contact your doctor. Relax. Breathe. It's Magatol, from the makers of Triggerol.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Hi, Jimmy. This is Bill Clinton calling your secret hotline here. I gotta keep it down because I'm calling from the doghouse here in Chappaqua, New York at our place. Don't even ask. All you need to know is she's on the warpath again. Oh boy. Hillary yelled at me for listening to you. I have to do it in secret. But I really admire your show. I really do. I'm calling to wish you the best. All the best. In the future and even right now. Oh, here she comes. Listen, I gotta go, but you got a great show and you're gonna do very well in the future, I'll tell you that much. Oh my God, I know it's gonna happen. She's gonna have me read chapters of her book again. Put us both to sleep. I know what the title of her darn book should have been. Should have been called How I Dropped the Ball on the 2-Yard Line with 3 seconds left in the Super Bowl. I gotta go.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome back your host of the Crossroads, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Yes, indeed. Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today. Once again, thanks for joining us, being a part of the program. Coming up in the next segment, we'll be joined by Hans von Spakovsky from the Heritage Foundation, a senior legal fellow, to get some insights on the president's authority when it comes to the Insurrection Act and the efforts to get control of the rioting that has spread all throughout the country. We'll dive into that topic coming up in the next segment here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. First, though, as a country, we are facing significant economic malaise. More than 40 million Americans now out of work. And just as businesses were starting to reopen, hundreds upon hundreds of them have now found their reopening delayed across the country because of rioting that has done significant damage to businesses, again, across the country. It's horrific. It's sad. It's tragic. We need to get the economic gears rolling again, but how do we do that? And is the tax code one way to accomplish that objective? Let's talk about it with a tax reform expert, someone who was deeply involved in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. He's the founder and CEO of Engineered Tax Services. Julio Gonzalez joins us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Julio, welcome to the show, sir. It's good to talk with you.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on. So let me ask you first sort of just a broad, big picture question. As I mentioned, we're seeing major, significant economic strife across the country. Seems to be worsening in certain respects, even as we're reopening. What's your overall sense for where things are at economically right now?
Yeah, it certainly is a mixed bag. We're used to it here in Florida, getting consecutive hurricanes that come through us, and then having to deal with that and come back from one after another. And what a punch, right? One, the COVID, and then followed up by the rioting, and super difficult for these small businesses to come back from consecutive hits. But fortunately, we had good tax policy coming into this virus, and we had a great economic activity, so we were at a high point, and certainly this co-virus has been tough, but CARES package came out and did some good. HEROES Act, came out of the House, which was dead on arrival at the Senate, but really I think we're looking at new economic tax policy, which is the payroll tax holiday for both business and individuals to spur economic activity. One, to get people to hire the people that are unemployed, and two, to get the unemployed to want to come back to work versus staying at home and getting $600 a week. So tax policy is important. It was in the 2017 when we lowered the income tax rates so that we could give businesses a chance to survive, that partnership with the government and lessen regulation, and that worked, right? We got to an all-time economic high.
One of the things that's interesting about the tax cuts debate is this idea that you are essentially just benefiting the rich only to the exclusion of average, everyday Americans. Let's go through some of the fallacies here as we talk about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and some of the taxation policies. And also, we'll get to the payroll tax cut possibility in just a moment. But when it comes to the idea of simply tax cuts for the rich and the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and that it only benefited the wealthier among us, what say you to that?
Well, there's no doubt that we saw consecutive records in money going to Treasury, going to the IRS, because more people were paying taxes. So it works, right? You lower income tax rates, get more people to work, increase wages because of demand, supply, and all of a sudden you got a lot more money going into the market and going into the collections. So it obviously worked well. I mean, it paid off. We lowered the regulation. We lowered the income tax rates. It got people to invest in their small businesses. It brought employment back, and people were making money. We had the supply and demand that brought the wages up, and obviously that paid off every month when we saw more money going into Treasury.
But when it comes to money increasing, I mean, what you're talking about is supply-side economics here, this idea that if you unleash the potential for the private sector businesses to invest in new opportunities, to hire workers, to construct new equipment, purchase new equipment, and what have you, that is the key to economic growth, more than, say, the idea of, we have a lot of talk about consumer demand in our economy. That's not really the driving force. It's job creation that comes from investment that then produces new opportunities in the private sector as far as businesses are concerned.
Yeah, we saw that work well. I mean, tax reform shouldn't be every 30 years, right? We should do it, routinely like we do with the interest rates, right? But that's difficult. And I know that the president wanted to have tax reform 2.0 because you always have unintended consequences, right? And sometimes you just want to work those out, but you don't want to work them out every 30 years. But clearly, tax reform, lowering the income tax rates for both individuals and businesses, gave a great boost to the economy, getting rid of the regulations, creating some tariffs to give us a fair advantage here at home. Those were things that were working well.
I don't want to get off track into the tariffs. I would disagree with you there, although maybe later on in the program or in our conversation we'll jump into that. But in terms of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and what that did in terms of reducing the tax burden, one of the things for me that's important to keep in mind is that first and foremost, the money that goes into the federal treasury is not the government's money. It is the taxpayers' money. You've actually earned that yourself. And so a lot of times we hear about giveaways. Oh, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was a giveaway to the rich, or giveaway to special interest groups, or giveaway to this group or that group. We're not talking about giveaways, though, are we, Julio Gonzalez? We're talking about enabling people to keep more of their money, which they're not then going to just put under a mattress. They're going to put it to work, either spending or investing.
Right, just like you said, with good tax policy, we were able to invest in equipment, we were able to invest in machinery, into buildings, we were able to grow the infrastructure to bring in employees because we had less of a tax burden that allowed us to take that money and invest in our employees and our businesses. When we're in business, you're in business with the government, and you want that partnership to be a good one. And for a decade, it was a poor relationship. We couldn't save money. We had bad tax law. We had high income tax rates, and we couldn't grow. We couldn't expand. And when we changed that tax policy, we really just wanted to bring down the income tax rates so that we could be competitive, right? We know that we weren't competitive globally, and we couldn't retain good jobs here in the United States, and the companies moved offshore because the tax rates and the tax systems there were much easier for them to profit and invest in their own companies. So at least we were able to level the playing field, and I think that did a lot of good for our country.
Again, we're talking with Julio Gonzalez, founder and CEO of Engineer Tax Services, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. You keep using the term partnership to describe businesses and the government. I understand the notion of public-private partnerships in certain ways, but can you define that term? Because I have never really thought of the average day-to-day relationship of business owners and the government as a partnership. So what do you mean by partnership?
Well, we understand that, we're going to have an income tax rate and that we're going to contribute to the money that goes into the system. But when we're contributing at 35% versus 21%, it's too onerous, and we can't grow and we can't, accumulate cash to make those investments. And that's what I mean by that partnership, that when you're in business, you understand taxation. You understand that there's going to be a price to pay with the revenues that you generate, whether it's employment tax, whether it's health insurance tax, state tax, and federal tax. But thank goodness, when we did the tax reform, we lowered that income tax rate to 21% for businesses so that we could at least retain some cash and invest in our companies.
Let's talk for a moment about the idea of the payroll tax cut, or the payroll tax holiday for the rest of the year. This is something that President Trump has proposed. Some are suggesting that at the minimum, what you do is you offer that for businesses that have 100 or fewer employees. Others saying it should be across the board throughout the economy. And of course, the payroll tax is the tax that we pay for Social Security and Medicare. It's 15.3% total, and if you're a sole proprietor, for example, you have to, like a self-employed individual, you have to pay the full 15.3%, but if you work for an employer, then it's split 50-50 between you, the worker, and also the employer. So talk to us a little bit about how you view that possibility in terms of what it could mean for the economy and what it means for workers and businesses.
Yeah, I view it as, what is the worst of the two evils, right? I mean, certainly you want money to keep continuing to go into the Social Security system, but not at the expense of small businesses never reopening. That's, that 7.5%, that's significant, right? So we're saving that. That's a big boost to our cash flow, and it's also a big boost in cash flow to the employees that would drive them to come back as well. So I think, if we had to look at it, we're saying, hey, government, invest in us. Say that, we're going to take this payroll tax holiday, and that you believe that based on that, we'll be able to reopen our businesses, preserve cash, invest in hiring, getting the equipment back up, getting our businesses back up, and that ultimately that investment will pay off as we get back into, 2021 and of 2021 as well, and pay back the system.
Julio, when we talk about the payroll tax, I mean, a lot of people will say, hey, and you kind of addressed this, you're not going to have money going into the Social Security and Medicare systems because of the tax holiday, and therefore that may put a bit more of a strain on two programs that are already struggling fiscally right now. But you also got to a point of saying that small businesses are suffering right now, and if they're not able to come back to work, because, say, COVID-19 hit and then maybe their business was decimated by the riots, or even if it was just COVID-19 and the shutdown put them behind and it's difficult to get back, you have that extra burden. Then that means that if a business goes out of business, they're not going to have workers paying into the Social Security or Medicare system come 2021 because that business isn't even around.
Absolutely right. I mean, I think we have to, as a country, say that we believe that this tax holiday is a great investment for everyone to get back up on their feet and get businesses back, get the employees back. And that savings is really could be the difference between the ability to hire more people and get back on our feet in a substantial way or not. And, every penny, every dime, every dollar counts when you're a small business owner.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, that's the thing. When we're talking about this economy, such a significant player is small businesses. Now, you mentioned regulation before, because that that can put a significant strain on businesses across the country, which is why we've seen the unprecedented deregulatory regime under this Trump administration. That is to say, what they've been doing with deregulation is literally unprecedented, significantly cutting the burden of the restrictions and the costs that come along with it. Whenever the government puts a regulation on a business, that means they have to spend more money for compliance, to follow through, to get verification. All sorts of different things get opened up with regulation, which can put a significant drain on the economy, which also can then result in lower tax revenue, can it not?
100%. Like I said, that partnership, you want it to be a good one, right? And with the regulation, reduced, right? You saw manufacturing coming back in a significant way. You saw mining coming back, transportation coming back, bank services, financial services coming back in a big way, because we released these burdens that were so onerous to a lot of us and a lot of our small businesses.
So, Julio Gonzalez, when we look at the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, as we go into this 2020 election cycle for the general election, what do you think are going to be the key messages that the president and his campaign or supporters should be talking about when it comes to the tax cuts and what, we get a lot of information that gets thrown about that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act weren't beneficial to the American economy and, as I alluded to before, just helped a very narrow stretch of, say, top 1%ers. So what are the things that you think really need to be expressed to the American people in the coming months? And how do you boil it down to average folks who may not be so in tune with the complexities of the tax code? Surprise, surprise.
Well, like you and I discussed, Tax Reform 1.0 was really the start of what was hopefully going to be Tax Reform 2.0, which was going back and getting lower income tax rates for individuals. So phase one was really focused on significant income tax rate reductions to the businesses. Phase two was going to be Tax Reform 2.0, getting income tax rates lower for the individuals. So that's no doubt what's going to be key. The other thing that's going to be key is long-term stability. A lot of these tax benefits that we put into 2017 expire. A lot of the income tax rates expire, a lot of the deductions expire, a lot of the tax credits expire, and they expire anywhere from 2 to 10 years. We need permanency as individuals and businesses. We need everything permanent to the extent that we know what tax code we're dealing with and what tax laws that we're dealing with, so that we can run our company not knowing if something's going to expire and never be extended. So I think those would be two really big pieces that the administration should frame the upcoming tax reform for the elections.
Just a few minutes left with you. Julio Gonzalez, our guest, founder and CEO of Engineered Tax Services. And one of the things that is just so essential for the American people to recognize also, I think, is the notion that when you get to keep more of your money, that's how it should be. Because it's, going back to my point before, it is literally your money. It belongs in your pocket, except insofar as it is needed by government in order to pursue whatever objectives are necessary in order to provide security, protect individual rights, make your life better. And instead, what we've often seen is when you have higher taxes, that can promote bigger and bigger government, more expansive programs. Although some would say that that's kind of balanced out by the borrowing that happens. That is to say, we have government grow massively with or without high tax rates, because if you don't have higher taxes, potentially you have less revenue, they say, and therefore you need to borrow more. We have seen a heck of a lot more borrowing in the past few years. So what do you make of those dynamics?
I think you bring up some good points. I think when you have a good tax system, a good tax economy, and you're having lower income tax rates, you're saving that cash. But that cash is never sitting idle, right? It's going into the stock market. It's going into the banks. It's going into consumption. It's going into buying products and services. And so that money, again, never sits idle, and it's the one thing that keeps the economy going. It's just kind of like a snowball effect, right? We're spending more, we're investing more, we're putting more money into the stock markets, more money into the banks and financial institutions. And we see when that happens that the economy is at an all-time high, unemployment is at an all-time low, And we got to hope that that continues.
And final question for you, Julio Gonzalez. Look, the reality of tax cuts and the reduction of the burden of taxation and also the reduction of the burden of regulation on the American people is that it promotes individual liberty and economic prosperity. The toughest thing, though, and this kind of goes to the question I asked a few moments ago, the toughest thing, though, I think for our side often, which is the side that believes you should keep more of your hard-earned money and that it's better for you and better for the overall economy, the toughest thing is, I think, getting the message across effectively. What do you think are maybe the two things, if you boiled it down to a way that we can be expressing it out there in short videos and ads and what have you, what are those things that you think, the top two items that you think can be succinctly expressed to the American people in an effective way from a messaging standpoint?
No question about it. What a good point to bring up. I mean, really, and maybe we've done such a poor job with the messaging. I would say that, thank goodness for people like yourself that are getting out great messaging out there. But prosperity, really, I mean, it's all about what our country was built on, which was that freedom. Freedom financially, freedom civilly, and prosperity. I think that's what we're talking about when we're talking about good tax policy, good economics, and the ability to start your own business. You can't start your own business if you don't have any money, right? You know that, right? You have your own business here.
That's right, yep.
And it takes you and investing in it, but that's what it takes. And when you have that freedom, that financial freedom, you have the ability to invest in yourself, and I think that's really important.
So actually, I have a few extra minutes, so I think I want to ask you about the tariff question for a moment. Why do you say that the tariffs are a good aspect to the American economy? I say that I'm a big free trade guy. I'm not persuaded that the trade war was particularly beneficial, but I always love when I hear someone who disagrees with that perspective. So what's your view on the tariff situation?
Yeah, I think on the tariff situation, I think you have to be selective, right? So I agree with you that in economic policy, free trade is really a good thing. Although I think free trade is really difficult when you have small businesses here in manufacturing in this country that simply cannot compete with low labor that we just can't have here in the United States, but they're ultimately really important to the economy of their towns. And so, I'll give you an idea. We had a company that produces small posts for construction sites out in Ohio, right outside of Toledo, and they were getting killed because the steel that Home Depot and everyone else could buy and these posts was just so inexpensive coming out of China. But there was just no possible way to get the labor down to that thing here because we have regulations. Maybe we need better regulations in combination. But I think some tariff management to help small businesses here in the United States that have that disadvantage is not a bad thing.
I think that in the end, what we see is that tariffs do raise costs, and they give incentive for American producers to increase their costs, and then that can get passed on. I see your point, though, and I think you hit on one fundamental observation that I make, which is that in terms of the regulations, I mean, that's the biggest cost driver is when you have this regulatory burden upon small, medium, large-sized businesses, you're telling them, hey, you have to spend more money in order to meet these regulations that oftentimes, I would say even more often than not, are unduly burdensome and unnecessary. Like, it's not like the federal government's looking at every regulation and saying, is this absolutely necessary, and what is the cost to the companies that will have to follow through with and abide by these regulations? And so if you have an excessive regulatory state, that's the phrase, that's the most harmful in that regard, I think. And that's where I would focus on.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a good point. We certainly saw that when we did some of the regulations and tariffs, that people here in the United States just raised their prices unnecessarily. And that was, extremely disappointing. That's not what we were trying to achieve there. But you're right, that was the unintended consequences that hurt people here. And I agree with you. And I'm not an economist per se, but I think there's got to be a right way to combine some of that management so that we're doing something that's ultimately good for our country. But I saw that abuse as well, and that was disappointing.
Well, Julio Gonzalez, it is important that we all keep in mind the benefits of letting people, as I say, keep more of their hard-earned tax dollars, whether it's from a liberty standpoint, hey, it's your money, your property, you earned it, or from the economic prosperity standpoint, and I appreciate you joining us to talk about that and more today.
Well, we appreciate what you do. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Stay well and be healthy, sir.
You too.
Once again, Julio Gonzalez, founder and CEO of Engineered Tax Services, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Yes, it is a fundamentally critical point. Tax cuts, or tax rate cuts is probably the even better descriptor, means that you get to keep more of your hard-earned money to then spend or invest. And wealthier people, by the way, invest that money. I'm a believer in eliminating the capital gains tax altogether. That's a whole other kettle of fish of a discussion. I'm kind of opening up another can of worms there. But the idea of allowing people to invest more in the economy, that's what gets things working. That's what's going to be needed in order to get the economic gears rolling again. Reduce the burden on businesses, reduce the burden on investors, reduce the burden on you. Especially because of the crisis that we're facing right now, we need every penny we can get. Well, that is going to be it for us today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Great to be with you tomorrow, Washington Examiner Wednesday, working up a great show. This coming Friday, we've got Dinesh D'Souza joining us for Free to Choose Friday and so much more that is happening. Be sure to check out our friends and partners at the Washington Examiner, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. And also, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all of the places. Please follow me there. Thanks to Nathan Matouche, producer extraordinaire, Julio Gonzalez, and you for watching. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. God bless America.